and we're going to get set here for our second session. Now, I do know that there's a lot. It's really interesting that you can hear from somebody who's at Danny Meyer's level, and then also hear somebody who's an exceptional chef at the top of his craft, who also used to work in one of Danny Meyer's restaurants. So we're going to get to Chad Williams here in just a second. So you're going to want to kind of, now you can kind of say, well, wait, this is what they were talking about. How was it, and how does it look when you put this into practice inside the restaurant? Lots of great insights to come, and I know you're going to have more questions there. If we didn't get to your question about Danny Meyer, that was my fault. I did my best to kind of sort through. There were a few I didn't quite get to. We only have so much time, but we can still get the themes going. But this is your chance, right? I mean, you'd be like, how often do you have access to some of the top minds in terms of performing under pressure? We're also going to be getting to Oliver Berkman in our afternoon in our session later. I know we're in morning and afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. So there's a lot more to come, is what I'm saying. And please do get your questions. I also know, talking about Shake Shack and talking about Pop-Tarts and whipped cream. So I'm kind of getting hungry. We will take a break after our next session before we get to our third session. So that'll be a chance for you to kind of get a break. But I want you to kind of power through here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my colleague, Kristen Fenty, who I think it actually still says Diana on the screen, but it's Kristen. So Kristen, how are you? Did you learn some things in the first session with Danny? Oh, I'm not hearing Kristen just yet. Let's see if we can fix that in just 1 second. We'll make sure. I don't think it's my issue. And it doesn't say mute. So Andrew's checking we were hearing Diana just fine. So I don't know if we changed. Up, there we go.
There we are.
Magic.
And yeah, I'm always happy to be considered Diana Hong. So
yeah, exactly. Well, listen.
All around.
Listen, we all bring our strengths, but Diana certainly brings a worldwide interest in restaurants that we all tap, like wherever we're going. We're like, Diana, I'm going to be in this weird city. Oh, well, I know the 3 best restaurants there. Just one of her great skills to hit. So in any case, let me go ahead and bring on Chad Williams, and I'm going to add him right in there. And then I'm going to get out of the way, and then I'll kind of collate through the questions. And when you're ready for questions, or if I get overwhelmed with some, I'll pop back on later and we'll kind of run through them. But you guys take it away.
That sounds great. Thanks, Scott. Hi, Chad. Thanks so much for being here with us today. We are really looking forward to this conversation. Just real quick, can you hear me all right?
I got you, Kristen.
Wonderful. And if you'll indulge me, I'd love to just take a moment and introduce you to the Admired Leadership community. So for everyone joining us today, Chad Williams is the head chef of Friday, Saturday, Sunday in Philadelphia. He is also the co-owner with his wife. And as you might expect from a seasoned chef, his resume is peppered with a variety of experiences across the country and around the world. He has worked in wonderful establishments such as Manresa and Cezanne in California, 11 Madison Park in New York City, as Scott mentioned, Guy Savoy in Paris, and several Philadelphia hotspots run by the Jose Garces restaurant group, like Almada and Alvez. And as a Philadelphian myself, those are ones that I hear all the time and exciting to have on your list of experiences, Chad. Since 2015, Chad and his now wife, Hannah, bought a boldly renovated a classic fine dining institution called Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And the restaurant had been a staple of the community since 1973. And so they really walked in and changed everything but the name, is what I understand. And Correct. After a couple of years of being in operation, in this summer, they took home the what is considered an Oscar in the restaurant industry, the James Beard Award for Outstanding Restaurant. And I hope that they're continuing to be on cloud 9 at this point and really celebrating some of that success. And Chad, I hope that we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit today. But before we get into where we are today, tell us a little bit about how you found your way into the kitchen to begin with. We know a lot of people find their careers through different twists and turns, but how did the kitchen become your calling?
Well, I grew up in a family of educators. So, my mother, my father, my grandmother all worked in the school district. They were teachers, they trained teachers. That was their love. And as a kid in middle school and high school, I thought that was my trajectory. I was going to be, some sort of academic. I loved anthropology. I loved history. So I went to Howard, spent 3 years there in the anthropology program. About halfway through, I started, waiting tables just to make some money in school. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I walked back into the kitchen and I see a plate of food, and for me, it was just eye-opening. It struck me that food could be art, food could be this, this really personal expression. And I looked at the chef and I was like, can I try this? And I was a young server. I wasn't in the wine. I wasn't necessarily in the food. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And I talked to my chef about it a lot and we laughed, but it was a seared lamb loin with mango puree. In 2002, like that was probably incredible. And I tried it and my mind was just blown. And then, I went back into his kitchen and he was cooking a lot of, traditional foods, African-American soul food, the gumbos, the dirty rice, beignets. And then my mind just exploded. I was like, this is special. And it was so much to learn, and being 20 and full of energy, it was, the kitchen just felt like the right place to be, this great place to suck up all this information. So after that third year, I said, hey, I'm going to work the whole summer, 7 days a week, see if I love it. I worked at 2 different restaurants, probably 100 hours a week at that point, and I was absolutely in love. Absolutely. Called my mom, told her I was dropping out, and she proceeded to call the restaurant weekly in tears to try to get them to fire me because I was throwing away my education at that point. And maybe up until about 10 years ago, she wished I went back to school, but we're okay now.
I'm glad it has a happy ending to that story, Chad, but certainly it would be hard to argue otherwise that things aren't going well for you right now, given all of the amazing accolades. So glad that you convinced her. And certainly something in common you had with Danny Meyer. In our last conversation, he was mentioning how his grandfather was kind of not, let's just say, supportive of taking an industry or a role in the restaurant industry. It just wasn't something that he thought was really worth the future. So
Right.
It's nice that many of you have been able to combine your experiences and demonstrate something otherwise. So, what I hear in your experience too, Chad, is a lot of curiosity. And so, that lamb loin with mango salsa and, what that created for your interest and intrigue and demonstrating some of that curiosity. How do you continue to bring curiosity to the restaurant today?
Well, I think it's the putting one foot in front of the other, because I feel curiosity comes in waves. You can have really long stretches, months or years of like this intense curiosity and creative output, and then you'll have dips. And it's really pushing yourself through when you are in that kind of trough and say, I have to keep opening the books, I have to keep going out and paying attention. And then that wave comes back, 100% of the time, but just like anything in life, there'll be a little segment where other things kind of take precedent. But for me, it always comes back to the kitchen and the food. But really, when you don't feel like it, when there's times when you don't feel like it, you need to pull the book off the shelf. You have to pull it down and say, okay, we're going to go back in this. Or if you have an idea and maybe today's not the day, today is the day, to try it out, to get in the kitchen and say, here's what we need to do. So, journaling, great for me, kind of keeps a record of where you are and keeps you in the mode of putting those ideas out into the world, even if they're not, in the form of food, like you're still pushing them somewhere. So the mind kind of, it keeps that expression going. You don't lose it. I think that's been the biggest thing, because when you're obsessed and the ideas are just flowing in, it's easy. That's the fun part of it. It's when they aren't and you have to kind of squeeze them out that you need to put in the work.
I'd love to hear more about the journaling aspect. I mean, we spend a lot of time thinking about, as a leader, how do you keep some of the things that you're working on front and center for you and driving that focus and making sure that it remains a priority. Can you tell us more about how you do that and why it works for you?
Well, for me, our days are often opposite of a normal kind of 9 to 5 day. So our freedom is in the early part of the day. So, we wake up, feed our daughter, get her off to school. And then right after that, I usually have about an hour where nothing is going on. Like the restaurant's not open, no one's in there. I can kind of push off a call until 11 o'clock. And in that time, I'll find, maybe 30 minutes to play, I call it, where you just pretend. I remember when I was a kid and I had my notebook and I was 22 years old, no idea was off limits. Everything was free. And you look back and they were horrible. But I think that's part of it. Like once you once you start to know, your mind gets accustomed to say, all right, I know what I'm doing here. I know how this works. You shut off a certain aspect of the creativity. And for me, that 30 minutes a day is come up with as many silly ideas as possible and see what's working. And then the analytical mind will take over later in the day and say, okay, maybe this isn't right. This may not work. Let's look at an older proven recipe and see how we can change it. But having that really free state of creativity just for 30 minutes a day, like compounded over 10 years, that's a lot of time of being a kid, keeping that childlike creativity. I think that's been the key. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And I'm curious, with your team, do you bring some of those those ideas that you're journaling? Do you then bring them to the team and say, hey, I have a wild idea, test me on this? Or, how do those conversations happen?
Right. I try to sneak them in there, because you want to let them kind of come up with the ideas themselves, and you want to almost kind of incept them a little bit. Say, hey, what if we tried this? Or this may be a good idea, and just kind of encourage them to think in the same way, because there's something about ideas, especially in food, like verbally, when you hear an idea, it never really sounds right. Only the person who came up with it, who conceived it, it's sitting in their brain as like a fleshed out idea. But when you go to speak about it, they usually sound bad 9 times out of 10, especially if it's not yours. Then you can't really understand a dish. I mean, you're trying to translate a complete plate of food in 2 sentences it's impossible. It really is. So you want to just keep that idea of freedom there, and then once you put the food to the flame, the idea starts to take shape, and then you can critique and correct and grow from there. But keeping that door open, even when as the chef you're like, this may be horrible, like I don't see where it's coming from, I have no idea, but 2 weeks later there's something beautiful in front of you. And that was an eye-opening practice that we try to continue today, and that I encourage with my chefs as well, because now that they're in positions of leadership in the kitchen, younger chefs will come with them with ideas, and they'll say to me, like, chef, this is not going to work. I say, just give it a shot. You never know where that idea comes from. It doesn't always have to be a complete ironed out, well thought over 10-hour experiment. Sometimes is just a flash, and it works.
It's sort of a starting point, a flame that you can feed over time and build on. And it sounds like in the kitchen, there's a lot of iteration that probably happens across the team as well. So, just a little bit about the kitchen. We know Hollywood would tell us, and there are very popular shows these days called The Bear. I hear maybe you haven't yet had a chance to watch that. I also am behind, apparently, in popular culture, and have not watched it yet myself. But what I do know is that the kitchen is seen as cutthroat, aggressive, toxic even. And there's a lot of experiences that you've had in a variety of kitchens, very world-class places. Is that really the case? Is that what the culture's like in those fine dining locations? What's it been like for you?
I've had a range of experiences. I think all of those have been true at one time or another. Mm-hmm. And I've been lucky enough to see them in maybe 6 or 7 iterations of 3 Michelin star kitchens and how they operate. And they're as unique as the chefs and owners. When people think of a cookie cutter experience of a 3 Michelin star, maybe if you look at a certain lineage of chefs, they're all the same, but they can be vastly different. I had some experiences at, say, Mugaritz in Spain, where no one yelled. There was never a raised voice. And when they admonished, and someone needed to be corrected, it was a whisper, and that was it. And that was one of the most intense, precise kitchens to this day that exist on the planet. But that's how they chose to do it. The standards were not low by any stretch of the means, but they were able to get that idea across without. And some other ones were very intense, ton of yelling, and their standards were also high. So it's not one size fits all. It's not, and I love, Hollywood probably likes the yelling and the swearing and, steam everywhere. And that's not every restaurant at all. at all.
Well, Hollywood's looking for the drama, but it is
Yeah,
interesting.
of course. Yeah, the quietness and the whisper doesn't, it doesn't pay the bills,
No, probably not. But interesting to think about all of the variety of experiences you've had. And what did you decide to bring with you when you opened Friday, Saturday, Sunday with Hannah?
I think it was the mentorship aspect and the kind of creating space for individuals to be creative. I think it's really, really, really important for people to have some agency and say, if I have an idea, here it is. I was at the Garces restaurants, we were given, free reign to do what we wanted to do. So that freedom was always there. And having guidance while you go through that process, I think is the best case scenario. If this is your career and this is what you want to do, kind of having that back and forth between, hey, here's my idea, I want to make this happen, give me some space, versus, okay, now I've made it, help me improve, help this be better. And that's where we step in and say, okay, now let's sit down, and having an honest opinion, who has skin in the game, correct the dishes. I mean, that's all you want. Because when you talk about critique coming from, say, guests or other restaurateurs, you can't put too much stock into what they say. I always say it's almost like a game of translation. When a guest tells you what they don't like about the dish, you have to translate it into what's actually on the plate, because they're giving you how they perceived it 100%. They're not lying at all, but they don't necessarily know what's in it, and they don't have to. They're telling you how it's perceived, and it's our job to go back and reverse engineer that and figure out what they're saying and why it wasn't successful. And that's another thing that I think is lost in the Hollywood kind of portrayal of chefs, is that almost like voracious need for feedback. We ask for it, and it's not, I guess it doesn't make for great television, but the best kitchens I've worked in, they were always looking for feedback. And some of them, I forget who taught me this little trick, but it was almost like, don't ask a question. You watch them eat. Maybe it's out of sight of the eye, and you watch their expression when they're putting the food in their mouth. That first that first second or two will tell you all you need to know. Either this is amazing, this is average, I couldn't care less, or I really don't like this. That you can tell by the face. You ask them, I'd say 25% chance of getting, an honest answer. No, I often don't do it. They ask me, and I just kind of say whatever I'm saying at the moment because I'm in conversation or whatever. But if they were to watch my face, like you can tell. So that's something we talk to the servers about, and our managers is really kind of paying attention to the guest response and in a nonverbal way, completely.
It's really interesting to think about feedback at from the words that come out of people's mouths, but more so in terms of what their experience looks like and what feedback
Right.
they're giving you without words at all. How do
Yeah.
you then translate that with the team? So you're noticing it, your staff, the managers are paying attention to.
Yeah.
I can tell this table over here may not be having the experience we want them to be having. What do you do with that next?
I think at that point, we'll revisit a dish or experience and say, maybe we're missing something here. Like, this isn't what we thought it was. And now with fresh eyes, say, okay, we loved it. We put it out. Our regulars told us it was great. Maybe it's not, because we're always trying to get to a point where this single dish is, a revelation for them. And you try, it doesn't happen. You think about an album, your favorite albums with 12 songs, there's 3 you don't like. And that may always happen, but you need to have them walk away loving, if there's a tasting menu with 10 dishes, 5 have to blow them away. If the other 5 they like and they weren't great, we understand everybody's palate is not the same, but you got to be able to hit a large swath of people with at least, half of your menu there.
They have to be walking out the door feeling like we want to come back.
Right.
And that was an experience we can't get anywhere else.
Right.
So keeping in mind just how the kitchen works together, and, from a whisper to the screaming, what is it like in your
Right.
kitchen?
We do a lot of whispering, and then the occasional scream. Sometimes we're overwhelmed by the moment, and at this point, I hope they're glitches more than a feature of what we do. But cooking is very moment to moment. It is a high pressure situation that is 100% real. I often think about it as, people are with you for 2.5 hours, and that impression of your restaurant, of your work, lasts for years. And you may not get a second chance to say, okay, we were sorry about this. This was a little overcooked. Oh, we're sorry, this was over seasoned. Give us another chance. That may not happen. And a lot of that boils down to the survival of the restaurant in your career, like in a very real way. Like these little nicks down on your reputation, or the people not loving it so much, changes the trajectory of your career. So I think we know that, and we know that intrinsically. So when the pressure mounts, it's not like there's a time clock going off, or a score on the board. That's not where the pressure comes from. The pressure comes from, this is our life. And if it's not done well, moment to moment, it could be very bad. And we feel it. And I think and from the top down, that the pressure comes down from us onto the cooks who see it as, okay, this isn't seared correctly, or I'm a little late on this dish. But for us, it's very much, this is our representation to the world, and we have to take care of it.
Yeah, the detail matters just as much as the ultimate experience that they have, because that sear is what
100%.
is that experience for them.
100%. Yeah.
So thank you for the lovely segue to our theme of the day, which is pressure. And so thinking about what that pressure means to the team, and we talked a little bit about feedback already, but how is it that you continue to motivate or encourage or inspire the team as they're recognizing some of the mounting pressure, they're feeling the pressure in the kitchen? How is it that you help them through that?
I think almost on the creative side, you want to minimize the pressure. I mean, when we talked about it earlier, about that creative brain does not, I don't think, function too well long term in that level of pressure. I think a lot of the guys I looked up to who really embodied that tea kettle kind of personality, where it's always simmering, didn't do so well. In year 8, year 9, you watch what happened to them as people and as creators. And I've been in this long enough to see the ones who kind of always were at like a simmering 7 and moved through, and it really felt like longevity. They were able to retain it, and they had their outside interests, which really helped them recover mentally from this pressure. And it was very much kind of moving with the seasons, the way nature kind of regenerates. You have your winter, your spring, your summer, your fall. Like, their lives felt like that. It was never just a 100% go all the time. And I think when we talk about inspiring cooks, like, you have to keep it light in that way, in terms of creativity. The pressure to be accurate and perfect, that's always there. That doesn't go away, but you have to almost separate those two and say, hey, we're in a little bit of a rut creatively. Let's just go have fun with a dish. It doesn't have to be great. This is not the idea that's going to change the world, but let's iron it out. We'll put it out as a special. We'll see how folks like it. And then you kind of really try to get yourself back in that rhythm, because, having a period in life where the ideas aren't working is real. You're continuing to churn them out, but nothing's hitting. This is not going well. And then if you push through that, eventually, what you're doing, it'll come back, and I've seen that through observing other folks' careers. And chefs and restaurants have been open for 25, 30 years. And the waves in popularity and creativity span, 5 years, a decade. If you look at Le Bernardin, or in Philadelphia, Mark Vetri, like, they've been going on forever. And sometimes in fashion, sometimes they're not, but it almost doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to them. And you still see them in the kitchen. They're still working on dishes, and they still love it.
So what I hear is a lot of the sustainability is really important for the long term. So making sure it's like the marathon we're running here, and it's not the sprint. I think it's interesting too. In reading up a little bit more about the Outstanding Restaurant James Beard Award, I realized that it's only something that is available to restaurants that have been open for 5 years, which is
Hmm.
different than some of the new restaurants. You know, they have like the ones who've just emerged on the scene that are very exciting. But there's a longevity element to that award, that honor that you are have been bestowed. So I know 5 years isn't necessarily the 30 you were using as an example for some of those other chefs, and you know, Vetri being one of them. But 5 years is a long time in the restaurant world. A lot of things are
Yeah,
fleeting.
sometimes restaurant years are like dog years. They they are very much so, especially for the physical restaurant itself and the people in there. That 5 feels like 30 sometimes.
Yeah.
So you have to keep it fresh.
How do you keep it fresh for yourself? So how not only do you inspire your team, but how do you make sure that you're staying in a place where it's constantly exciting for you and it's driving you forward, and you don't get stuck in ruts, you know, as infrequently as possible, I suppose.
I think what I've discovered recently, and I watched say Danny Meyer and Daniel Hum at 11 Madison and Josh Skeens at Saison, big projects, big changes kind of fuel you. When you go dish by dish, at the end of the day, you look at it, it's just food on a plate. How many different ways can I change it? But when it's wrapped up in this larger change of, say, the menu format or the physical space or the style of cooking, it really inspires you. It really, really, really inspires you. And so much of our creativity in the kitchen is tied to nature. And what you're doing is every year the ingredients resurface and you have to treat them a different way. And you have to find inspiration in peas. Peas have been around forever. We've eaten them, since you're a kid, you hated them. But every year you look at it and something draws you to it, and you're trying to look at it a different way and draw inspiration from it. And sometimes that can be difficult. But when you're creating this whole new experience around it, it allows you a different way to look at these raw ingredients and what you're taking out of the ground. So for me, that's been a newer idea that I've kind of come to terms with, is that these big changes, like when we moved from a la carte to tasting menu or a la carte to prefix menu, then to tasting, like every time the food changed because it had to fit the new format. So now we're doing a kind of a large remodel of the dining room, which changes the number of seats we have, which changes the style of service. Now the food must change again. So it's really inspiring because now you have a whole new canvas to work with, and it really helps push you along in the creative aspect.
So you're able to propel change and really sort of the macro pieces that are happening around you, you know, whether it's the menu or the dining room, or perhaps it's,
Right.
quarter by quarter, you have new food you need to be thinking about, or maybe old food, but in a new way. And you've
Right.
mentioned creativity a lot, Chad. Is that something you look for when you're hiring? How do you judge someone's creativity when you're thinking about, hey, is this going to be a good member of our team as we're building this team?
That's tough. I think at this point we hire more for palette. I think that's the biggest thing. Creativity you can almost help folks with. You never know who has that innate knack for it and that like love to create. When it comes out, you're just so excited that they're part of the team, but also you're excited for them. Like you're watching somebody find their niche in life, and that is thrilling. That is such a, like, one of the grander moments in my career is when you see somebody come aboard and they're a line cook, they're working through the stations, and then you give them a chance to make staff meal, you give them a chance to work on a dish, and the lights go off, and they're just thinking about, oh my God, this is incredible. Here's my idea. It's working out. And the food tastes good. Technically it may not be perfect, it may not fit, but you watch somebody with who has a well-developed palate come in, that is incredible. So we try to hire for that when we're talking about management and the chefs, because that's tough to teach. It can be a hard thing to really get everybody on board with that flavor profile that we work towards.
Us novices out here, Chad, what should we know about that, like palette? So tell us more about that.
Oh wow. I the way I look at it best is I love music. My parents also musicians. You know, my mother played for Donny Hathaway when she was at Howard. My grandmother played the organ, and in church there was always music in the house all the time. I love music. I can't tell whether a note is going up or down. I've tried 1,000 times. It doesn't work. I really COVID. I played the piano for 8 months straight. Nothing happened. For the palate, it's kind of the same way. You know, people may love food. They may really enjoy the experience of cooking, but when a dish is in front of them and you ask them to kind of tweak it a little bit and make it right, it may not necessarily hit. When you're talking about the intensity of flavors, the balance of, you know, salt, acid, fat, it may not click so much for them in a certain way. You know, understanding aroma and really how flavors change in terms of cooking, it may not be clear to them. Some folks just get it. It's just straightforward, and you see it happen. And for others, it takes some work. It does take some work.
Is it something you can really refine though if someone doesn't have it, if they
Oh,
don't?
100%. Oh,
Yeah.
I remember as a kid, and I didn't come from a culinary household at all. That was the one thing we didn't do. But when I first got into it, I would, you know, tea was cheap at the time. So I'd buy 7 different teas and I cup them at home and smell them. And I was like, okay, this is a way for me to kind of train my nose, because I didn't really drink a ton, so that wasn't part of it. But this was something I could explore. And then when you cook, a great mentor of mine always told me, close your eyes and the world opens up. So as you taste the dish, you shut down your visual senses, and everything starts to kind of grow in there, and you can not hear, but it almost takes on another form when the eyes close. Everything becomes a little bit brighter, a little bit louder. The notes of flavor become a little more distinct. And that blew my mind. So I was like, okay, this is something you can work on, and you really can push forward. And it's difficult, and because there's almost no reference. It's not a song you can play back. You know, it's not a piece of art you can stand in front of for an hour. Like, you get the taste that you have at that moment, it's gone. And we try to describe it to each other, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's a very fleeting kind of art form.
That's really interesting. I mean, in organizations, we think about how people have to live and work and breathe in ambiguity all the time. And there isn't necessarily a single word or situation that we can describe in a certain way. And so I hear a lot of the ambiguity there of, you know, we're living in the gray here. You know, we're going to have to figure out how we articulate this and explain it, and how do we develop this. And I like the example there of closing your eyes to find the greater focus, which is at least how I took it, Chad. You know,
Oh,
we can
100%. Yeah.
do more if we're actually taking away one of our senses so that our others are stronger. So we've talked a little bit about the team here and there. You know, Danny Meyer talked a little bit about the pandemic and some of the pressure that was created as a result of the challenges, specifically for the restaurant industry overall, and some of the restaurants where he is involved. I understand that through the pandemic, certainly you made different choices for the menu. You know, I know like many, you had limitations in terms of capacity and how many people you could be serving. I also understand though that at the end of the pandemic, most of your staff actually returned, which was an anomaly for a lot of people, you know, with help wanted signs in their windows. Chad, why did they come back to Friday, Saturday, Sunday with you?
I don't know. I mean, we were just lucky that they did come back, and we're grateful every day. I wish I knew the answer. You know, hopefully they felt taken care of. During that time, it was really rough, and the uncertainty was palpable. You know, but I guess hopefully we created a space that people wanted to come back to. You know, and that kind of support system there, because at the end of the day, I think it was a shock that for a lot of folks, that safety nets that were there kind of fell away. And, you know, we always joke in the kitchen, like we all we got, you know, as a team. When things are going bad, we joke about it. But in a way, if you cook and this is what you do, and you've chosen to stick to this path, it can be difficult. It can be difficult to find your way out of that kind of gravity where a life can go well and you can build a career out of this. there's no there's no playbook. There's no playbook. So hopefully they felt like we were giving them a chance to succeed and move forward in life. So.
Yeah, it sure sounds like, I mean, I know you're being humble and modest there, Chad, but
No,
it's
I don't know. No, literally, you don't. You can make up reasons in your head why it happened, but trying to figure it out is I think it's a fool's errand. You know, you try to do your best and hope that they enjoy working for you.
great. And I see Scott's popped up here. What questions do we have from the audience so far?
A couple of questions, and we've been tracking things in chat, and then people have been passing me notes, and some in the zeitgeist. One interesting thing that I noticed between what Danny had to say and what you had to say. Danny made this point about in hiring, looking for the kind eyes and the observation it takes to make that decision. You talked about this idea of watching the expression of the person that's dining. So it's not what the person interviewing for the job is saying. It's not what the person is saying about their meal. It's watching for something deeper. And then you talked again about that idea of closing your eyes to think about the sensation of the thing that you're eating. So the point that I'm pulling together from all of these questions is how much is that power of attention combined with the intuition that Danny spoke about? How much of that is a key to your success? The things that you're really carefully honing in your ability to observe and intuit.
I think that it's the number one factor, I would say, and a lot of what we think about and work on is refining that observation and what it means, because you can overreact, you can put together pieces that aren't there, but at the end of the day, people say trust your gut, and that's how I almost take it, is that we come with this set of ideas that when we look at someone and we interact in a nonverbal way, we need to be able to pick up these cues from folks, and that's how we made it this far in our evolution. So they didn't go away just because we have iPhones and online reviews and, cameras everywhere. It doesn't change that feeling that you get when you're in front of someone and they're eating your food. Mm-hmm. The shift in the body, the smile, does it go away? Does it brighten? Do they lean over? Do they kind of shimmy in their seats? That's kind of my favorite one, is when somebody likes something. It's almost like this tiny, it can be imperceptible at the time, but it's like a little shimmy. They're like, oh, this is good. And I'll catch myself doing it. It's a real thing. Like, they could ask me how it is and I'll say, oh, it's great, but it doesn't tell. Like, I really enjoyed this. It shocked me in a way.
Does this get to the level of training where you're teaching your managers?
We're trying to, so that's something I'm trying to figure out.
Observe.
Right. I'm trying to figure it out now. They make fun of me all the time and yell at me because they ask, what am I looking for? And I've just been doing it for so long that I have this idea of what you should be looking for. And it sounds goofy. It doesn't sound like something you should have to do in your job as a food professional. But if you're really trying to get feedback from folks, which is important, you have to use every cue they're going to give you. And I think that's a big one. And it comes to the focus of the food. You're really trying to dig down deep into these flavors and textures you're trying to create. And I don't know if it always translated into the experience for the guest, but as the creator, I think you need to sharpen that skill as much as you can. Because I've had some great dishes that weren't, technically perfect. I've had some phenomenal dishes that were underseasoned. That would be a sin, in the kitchens I've worked in. But there was enough around that. Like, you're trying to create this magic. And how you get there, everybody gets there differently. Every chef has a different palate, a different way of working, what they think is special. But I think we're always trying to hone the same set of skills, in the background.
So there was a question about your training in college in anthropology, and then you also mentioned art. So at one point, and you kind of made the offhand, sometimes it's food on the plate, but there are some higher meanings here. What does food tell us about ourselves, sort of anthropologically? And for you, is it a study? Are you studying it from more the anthropological angle, or you said it's an art? Which is it, or is it all of those things?
I think it's both. I think it's both. And when you look at the history and the anthropological record, food plays such a big part of that. And we watch how ingredients travel, and we watch how techniques travel. And even at this point, we can kind of tell how palates change. That is extraordinary. For me, I think that was a big transition, and that helped me move into food, because I studied that and I was like, this already is a beautiful idea and I love it. And watching it come together on a plate for me was fascinating. Like when you look at the history of, say, barbecue and how that came about, and you have kind of three different distinct cultures come together to create one dish. And of course, everybody lays claim to what it is and how it got there. But when you see one ingredient show up and change it, and one technique come in and change it again, it's really just phenomenal. And that's more of a, I wouldn't say cold way to look at it, but it's not the emotional side. And then when you talk about the emotional side and family recipes and what they mean to people, the truth often doesn't matter where it came from or why, who created it. It's just my mom's dish. This is how she made it. And it evokes an emotion in me that is unparalleled. It brings people to tears sometimes. Like when they think of the food their mom made, or they get to taste it again for the first time, it can be kind of earth-shaking for them. And that has nothing to do with the reality of why this dish came to be and is sitting in front of you. It doesn't matter at all at that point. So I think they exist at the same time, but they're very, very distinct.
Thanks. All right, I'll pop out as we head into this final stage and you wrap up there, Kristen.
Sounds great. Yeah, we just have a couple of minutes to go here, Chad. And I'm just curious, selfishly maybe, what's next for you and Hannah? You've had such success with Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You are continuing to celebrate the James Beard Award. What can you tell us about what's next for you all?
Well, I think for us, we're continuing to push Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We've always dreamed of having, a 25-year-old restaurant where we're still in there and greeting customers, and it's looking like it's going to be possible. We're a third of the way through almost, and it may happen. So we just continue to make upgrades in the restaurant itself, and really work on the next kind of generation of chefs who are going to come through and staff, and see how we can continue to grow and make it that staple. I have a lot of good mentors who've been able to do it and kind of show me the path forward. So it seems attainable at this point. It seems like something we can do. And it is my dream. So that's the big one. And hopefully we'll open another restaurant, but we don't want to have 75. That's not our goal.
Well,
we
you
really
have a lot
love
of
what
fans. You have a lot of fans here that are rooting for you, and it sounds certainly like it's exactly where you're headed, and your trajectory only will continue to go up from here. We really appreciate you letting us learn from you today, to hear about how you think about feedback, mentorship. It's interesting. You opened by talking about how your mom and your dad and, there were educators in your family. It certainly sounds to me like you brought education to the kitchen in terms of how you're mentoring your team and how you consider to think about that. But we really just appreciate the time. And I hope that anyone finds themselves in Philadelphia, they make their way to 21st and Pine, and make sure to check out Chad and Hannah and the team. You won't regret it at all. There's a wonderful experience there. And I highly recommend the gnocchi and the rose-colored glass. Chad, just really appreciate your help and time today.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Scott, I'll hand it back.
All right. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Chad. Really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for great questions. And obviously a lot of folks saying what insights they got from this last session. All right. We are going to take about a half-hour break, and we'll be back. You're going to want to hear Oliver Berkman. His book, 4,000 Weeks, very popular, a book about time management for mortals. It's way beyond time management, and it might be way beyond mortality. It's going to get kind of deep, and it's going to require attention. And I think that's the lesson that I've gotten from these first two. I kind of pointed to that in the question for Chad there, which is Danny Meyer just talked about the power of the leader to be observing what's happening carefully, particularly even the hiring moments, looking at the eyes. And to hear what Chad said about that idea of watching carefully. How are people, what are the expressions that they're using when they're seeing what's happening? We can all apply these things to all of our work, because we know in those moments is where the real intuition happens. And that's where leaders can make a really great difference in making everybody better on their team. So join us in half an hour. We're going to go back to, let me see if I can go to my tricky overhead shot. Yeah, there I can do that. And then we're going to put up a. You don't have to go if you're going to stay with us. You can let this continue to play. I'm going to put up a placeholder here, and then we'll be back with you at the bottom of the hour. Thanks, everybody.